Good morning. Welcome back to another episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm your host, James Sweatsuit Sweeney, joined as always by Chris Warren. Chris, today I want to talk about tilt. You ready?
Let's do it.
Excellent. So this is a topic that I feel like we've talked about 1.5 billion times, and not just us, just kind of poker in general. Eventually you get from going into the strategy side of things to getting into the mental side of things, because there's kind of a ton of work to do on both sides. And for a lot of players, I don't really want to talk about the tilt stuff or the mental stuff because, well, we have more pressing strategic matters to discuss. But I think you need to be discussing and talking and thinking and working on both sides if you want to be a well-rounded player. So before we kind of jump into kind of some of the things we can do to improve the tilt side of things, why don't you talk a little bit about how tilt has impacted you over the years as a poker player?
Yeah, well, I would just say, when I first started playing poker, I don't remember tilt being too big of a deal. It was just, I was trying things out. I was trying to figure out my way around advantage play. Where it really started to kick in is when I became a professional. I was doing this 60 to 80 hours a week and, having to live my life outside of poker as well, just over the years, 5 years as a professional, it really did start to become one of the biggest challenges, because I think something that people don't consider is that, showing up for a half hour or an hour or once a week playing for a long session, 4 to 8 hours, it's easy actually kind of to implement your game and be super focused and energized. But when you start increasing the hours, at least for me, that was when the challenge really went up, because you're dealing with more variance. You're having to, take a big loss and then show up the next day for work, or you're just reliant on that income. And so psychologically, it's, more impactful when you're, down $2,000, down $5,000. You're like, oh, this sucks. There really aren't too many other professions where you're going to, put in a great 8-hour day at your job and come away, negative $2,000. It's pretty tough. So for me, that as I increased my seriousness with poker, I think that's when it really became more challenging.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I've kind of run the gamut on tilt over the years. I mean, I think you can remember me in college. I would be a little bit tilty at times, to say the least. I've thrown things, broken things, put my face through a wall quite literally, and, just done really, really dumb things on the mental side of the spectrum. And as I started to take poker more and more seriously, I realized that I had to put more and more work into that, because even if it's not directly impacting my poker win rate, it's definitely impacting my life quite negatively. And as such, it's going to impact my will and want to study, my will and want to put in volume. And especially as you're playing more in the semi-pro or the full-time pro side of the spectrum, you cannot do anything that's going to impact your volume. Because once your volume starts getting impacted, it can get very difficult to get back on the wagon. And if poker is really what you're reliant on for income, you cannot let the volume get lazy. And I don't know. I've never really, I shouldn't say I never played full time. Like playing 30 hours a week, studying 15 hours a week is probably where I capped out in terms of it being a profession.
Yep.
But you put in a lot more hours than I did. And I would definitely classify you as full-time pro. And we've talked about this on previous podcasts, but when someone is playing lesser volume, and even not even semi-pro, let's just say they're playing 10 to 15 hours a week, and they don't need poker for the money, how should that person be thinking about tilt in general and kind of the mental side of their game? Is that something you think they should be putting more study time and effort into the strategy or more into the mental? Which way do you kind of lean in that way?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I even know some pros that really focus on playing maybe let's say an hour to 2 hour long session, and they'll just do that twice a day, and that's really their time at the table. So you really I think have to be aware of the balance of what you're able to bring, what's required from your game. If I'm going to play 1-3 live, it's not really going to take that much mental effort to really, I think, get locked in. Sometimes it does, actually, because the 1-3 players will make different plays and you will get more value from paying attention to what they're doing. But say maybe it's my standard game where I'm familiar with all the regs or something like that. I know what everyone's raise size is. I know all the decisions are kind of pre-made, so maybe that's not as intense. And I think that's kind of a big part of it, is you just have to be aware of like what you're trying to do. If you're switching between cash games and MTTs, I think you'll have different challenges. If you're, playing live and online, you'll have different challenges. If you're really focused on beating this one limit, which I find a lot of our students aren't, a lot of people really like to have some variety. So, just being aware of what is the mental load that you're taking on, because I think that's a big part of it. I think just having a plan, being aware. I'm a big fan of anytime things go wrong, take a note on that, almost like a little journal entry. Oh, I was playing, 1-3 at the bike and, ended up spewing off a stack. This is why I think it happened, or this is what was going on that day. So for me, that's really impactful, because then you just have this little, database of like all the times that you tilted and things went wrong. And, maybe you can find a pattern in there. So that's my number one recommendation, I would say.
Yeah, I like that. And we haven't really defined tilt, just because I think tilt is kind of a term that most people know. But just in case you're like, well, what the heck is it? Or what is the exact definition we're using here? I'm saying it's pretty much anything that knocks you off of your A game, maybe your B or better game. Anything that degrades your quality of game. And that's clearly a relative term, right? Because if you're just starting out in poker, like, you don't have an A game the way that a professional has an A game, right? But you know what your A game is. You know it's you performing the best strategy that you know how. And you know that that's going to get, better and better over time as you put in more and more effort. But as soon as those mental things start creeping in and you're not playing the best game that you know how, you're not implementing your strategy as best as you possibly can, then you're tilting. And the thing with tilt is that there are a lot of different types of tilt, right? There's kind of traditional tilt, which is what we think about when someone gets really, really angry and all of a sudden they just start making like overly aggressive and just really, really ridiculous plays. But there's also winner's tilt, there's boredom tilt, there's like all these other kinds of tilt as well. To your point of writing down when you do tilt and trying to determine what kind of tilt it is, why you think it might be happening. Is it something that happened during a session, before the session? Is it something that is pressing on something that actually impacts your day-to-day life that you're not aware of? So I've tilted at the poker table for things that happened outside of the poker table, and
Yes.
I've tilted in real life over things that happened at the poker table, even though they didn't tilt me in real time when I was playing that session. Like, you have to be aware of things like that, and note taking, I think, is a really, really good way of doing that, just because anytime you journal, it's really good for that introspection, and most people just don't spend the time to introspect anywhere near enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know for me, the type of tilt I have is just so precise. It's like, I don't play well when I'm down a bunch of money. I don't even really want to play. So it actually works out fairly well. And so for me, I just had like a real simple rule where it's like, okay, if I'm down like 3 buy-ins, like that's it. That's the day. I'm always going to cut it. Maybe a few exceptions. But yeah, I just always know for me and I didn't know this up front. I think I just, over time, it just became so clear that like, oh, when you're down money, that's when like the decision-making tends to degrade and you're thinking more about, whatever. And for me, even I could just like quit the session and just come back later. Just like even the process of like closing down my online tables was often sufficient just to be like, okay, I get to relax, reset, feels psychologically like a fresh new session where I'm not trying to cover any losses or anything like that. And but people have such different levels of tilt. Like I've noticed winner's tilt is extremely common, where people just start making bluffs that they wouldn't, or maybe sometimes there's a form of winner's skill that kicks in where it's like all of a sudden they start making bluffs that they should have been making all along. So yeah, just being aware of like, I think, that what are the worst times, but even maybe one of the times that you feel like you're playing really well, what were the circumstances, what was going on, what were the types of players that are around. So just figuring out what are the variables that impact your success.
Yeah, totally fair. I guess I'll share it. So my form of tilt is typically entitlement to some extent. I really hate watching someone who's very, very bad at the game run very, very well. And I also hate another form where there's one really bad reg. Just like, they're clearly a break-even player, fine, no problem. but like the game is really, really soft and they are the vacuum and they are vacuuming up they're just running the good side of, getting hand after hand that's playable against the weaker opponents and constantly just winning decent sized pot after big sized pot. And it's like, well, when is it my turn to double up against one of these goofballs over here? And those are the ones that kind of drive me nuts, or they used to drive me nuts. I put in a lot of work to make that a lot less of a problem, but it's still one of those that some people would never like put their finger on that. Like, why is that triggering you? Like, it really shouldn't. It's just, the cards do what the cards do. But and that's kind of one of the biggest things you have to remember. The cards have no memory. No one typically is like that out to get you, especially the cards, because again, they have no memory. So why would you ever get mad at something that's it's not personal, it's not an attack on you, it's just simply what's happening that day. And if you can't handle those things, then poker as a full-time profession is just never ever going to work. Poker as even a semi-profession thing isn't going to work, because it's just going to, what are you comparing against, right? You're spending this mental energy kind of keeping this accounting of how you're running in a luck perspective in terms of, which stacks are you getting a chance at, or which hands are you not catching enough of. And it's like, think about all the mental energy that most people spend on that kind of thought process that could have been spent on finding extra edges and be that on table, off table, whatever. It's just a wasted amount of thought.
I completely agree. I think the most important thing for tilt, I think for most people, is that kind of like running narrative of like, what is it that we're doing with poker? What is the process that I expect to happen? Because I think it's very easy, especially as you get better and you start having good results, to get, into the mentality of like, I'm going to the table today to make money.
Yeah.
And to me, that really speaks to the entitlement, the expectations. That is not how poker works. It doesn't matter how good you are, going into a standard poker game, your probability of winning. I think I checked my stats recently and it was between 60 and 66% of my sessions were winning sessions, right? And some of the winning sessions were a lot bigger, right? And there was a good, healthy hourly rate in there. I was making, in live games, in the different games between $35 and $90 an hour. But at the same time, a third of the time that I'm going and showing up and putting, driving to the casino, I'm going to leave with less money than I have. And if I have that expectation that I'm going to go show up, print my money off and go home, I'm going to be psychologically uncomfortable every time that I'm down money. It may not even be that session where I literally end up down money. It could be like I start off the session and I get stacked in the first orbit. Like then I'm like, I should be making money. This is bullshit. I think everyone has those days where they slip into that. Maybe they had a bunch of winning sessions in a row and you just relaxed a little bit and you didn't kind of remind yourself that you're going in and you can lose. And the way that I've really solved it is that I really view poker as a puzzle. It's my job to go in and solve the puzzles that I'm presented with. It has nothing to do with results. And it's one of the reasons I've actually really loved GTO as I've started to study it more and more, is it helps make me more objective and helps me step back from the winning and the losing and really focus on my effort on, like you said, the edges that I can generate for myself.
Yeah, it's totally fair. And the expectation thing, I think, cannot be overstated. Because if you do think you're going to go in and have 100% winning sessions and I'm just going in to print my paycheck for the day and I'll clock out when I hit my paycheck, like that's not how poker works, as anyone who's played this game for more than like 2 months knows. And I kind of developed a formula a while back that happiness equals when outcome is greater than expectation. So you're happy when outcome is greater than expectations. So the way that I treat it, you mentioned having a 3-buy and stop loss, and I used to do stop losses that aggressive as well in the past too. I used to say, okay, I'm treating this, my expectation is that I already lost the 3 buy-ins. Because way, what's the absolute worst that happens? I walk out neutral because I lost my 3 buy-ins, or realistically, I walk away with anything more than negative 3 buy-ins, and all of a sudden, okay, I can be a little bit happy. It's almost like tricking our brains, because our brains are just so kind of simple sometimes. But I don't know, like do whatever you have to do to keep yourself away from tilt. And that's just one of those things I realized works for me. And what works for me may not work for you, but you're not going to figure out what works for you unless you're willing to put in kind of a little bit of introspection and time in figuring out what the heck is triggering you and getting you away from your A game overall.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. It's just the more that you can get your mental energy focused on the advantages and the process and what you have to do, it just that's what poker is. I mean, the people who do that, it was, I remember when you were in college and I remember you would have like, it was so interesting because tilt never seemed to affect you that much. Even if you were like frustrated, but I thought that the downside of it was the distraction, right? Because I would remember like, this was very early days before either of us, I think, were even out of college. We would go to Turning Stone Casino and like at the end of the session, you know, I would be obsessed over like what I could have done, what the lines were, what was the right strategy. And if you had a bad session, you would be you'd be like, oh, I can't believe this happened. And this was so brutal. And there was a lot of bad beats. And that definitely went down over time. To the point, I haven't heard you tell a bad beat in, I don't know, 5 years or something like that. And that's, I think, just a good way to think about it, is that your energy is always going to go somewhere. And this is, I think, true for most activities. And the more you have your energy focused in the productive direction, that's what's going to allow you to get ahead of everyone else.
Agreed with that. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to join some sort of poker community and not to vent out your tilt. Like, please, please, please don't do that. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
And no one cares because everyone's going through it, right? Like, if you play poker at all, like, bad stuff is happening to you left, right, and center. I mean, if you live and breathe in 2020 or 2021, like, yeah, bad stuff is happening. Like, we're all going through it. No one cares. But it's actually to go through and share something and make sure that you're focused on the right stuff, the right part of a hand, the right part of a strategy, because that's where you can actually make changes versus I ran bad in a spot. Okay, cool story. We've all run bad in a spot. Like, we've all actually probably run bad in that exact situation. So, like, don't beat yourself up over that because it's out of your control. You can only control two things in life, your actions and your reactions. So don't get burned over stuff that you literally can't do anything about. What's the point?
Yeah. And I actually, I think you set up the Discord. I think you intentionally left off a beats channel. So we have a brags channel, but there's no beats channel. And I think that was brilliant to just, you know, we don't want to focus on that. And I remember we had one person who was talking a lot about their beats, and I just, you know, we just had a chat and I was like, hey, let's just like not worry about beats. You know, it's like, if there's something we can learn, absolutely, let's go into that. But why even worry about your beats? Like, that's just poker, and our goal is to be mentally resilient and handle that. And, you know, I think actually one of the things that's really interesting, so I've talked with Elliot Rowe, who's a great sort of mental coach, about this. And he said, and he works primarily with a lot of high stakes poker players. And he said that, like, that is the game at high stakes, is getting people when they're off guard or they're tilting that day. And that's just like, you know, they'll spend, you know, thousands of dollars with Elliot just to make sure that, like, there's no compromise in my psychology right now. So, you know, while we're talking about how important this is, it's important to remember too that everyone is going to deal with this. You know, humans are not robots, especially when it comes to winning and losing large sums of money, whatever those are, you know, whatever those feel like to you. You know, it could be $20 if you're playing tuna limit, right? So yeah, just being aware that, like, whatever you're dealing with, that is part of the process. And that, yes, our goal is to be as efficient and diligent as possible, but you will absolutely have missteps. I still have tilting mistakes. There was actually, in my live sessions, I would like keep track. You told me that was probably not the healthiest thing to do, but it was interesting because I did it for a long enough period where it was like, I could literally see thousands of dollars that I had missed out on. And what that would have done to my win rate. So every time, it was actually extremely motivating to see that number. Was like, okay, whenever you prevent tilt, it's like a 30, 50, even 100% bump to your win rate. Now, all that said, I still had a win rate that I think is higher than people think is possible in live games. And whether that's, you know, sample size appropriate, I don't know. But what's interesting about that is that for me was so motivating. And but also like I made so many mistakes and I was still able to generate a significant win rate. So you're going to have to deal with this. This is going to be part of the process of you playing poker. And in fact, if you think you're playing perfect, that's probably more concerning than if you feel like you're dealing with some tilt and playing your A game problems.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Perfectionism is such a weird thing because there's like, I think, two different kinds of poker players. The small number of people that think they're playing perfect. And those people typically either don't stick around very long or realize very quickly, like, okay, I'm pretty far from perfect. And they put in some serious work and get away from that. Yep. Or number two, people that are like striving towards perfection, like they're kind of perfectionist in real life. And then those people can go on tilt a bunch of different ways. And typically it's like anytime they make a mistake, all of a sudden it can just snowball into like a super tilt session for like no reason, which ironically gets them further and further away from perfectionism. So it's one of those, like, if you bend towards the perfectionist side of things, which can work out okay in other facets of life, poker just doesn't allow for it because there's such an element of unknown, there's such an element of luck, and it's just, don't beat yourself up over it. Like, the goal isn't to play perfect. I mean, yes, okay, the ideal goal would be to play perfect, but it's just not realistic. And if it's not realistic, then don't hold yourself to that standard. And as such, if you're doing that, again, less chance you're going to tilt because, mistakes are baked into the equation. If you're having a win rate and also making mistakes, like, that should be very encouraging.
Yes.
It's actually funny you said that, and I'm like, I could see most people going the exact opposite way with that. Like, just getting really, really pissy that they're missing out on those thousands of dollars versus looking at it from a different perspective of, oh, okay, if I just play a little better, work a little better, work a little harder, all of a sudden I will recoup things like that in the long run. I'm not going to recoup those exact thousands of dollars, but there are new thousands of dollars available for me if I curb these strategic and mental mistakes.
I love those new thousands of dollars.
Right? They're just out there. We just got to get after them.
Exactly. Yeah. It's, I think it's exactly that. Yeah. I think you can take anything that you experience in poker and convert it into that motivation. And we have to be understanding that we won't be perfect. And it's exactly what you said about expectations. If what is really happening and is preventing you from is different than what you expect to happen, that you will experience pain with that. That is where it comes from. And I think everything we can do, all those little tricks, like, making sure we view it as a sample size, looking at our long-term graphs and how that goes. And just understanding that, our goal in poker is the long-term. It's about repetitions. And so our expectations have to be tied to those long-term results, ideally. And for me, it's interesting. There's so many fun little anecdotes that you can pull out. Like, I remember looking at my live graph, and it was like I was up some really good sum of money for an hourly rate for the games that I had played in. And yet I went in and I looked in, and I think I looked at, I forget exactly how many hours. It was like 100 to 200 hours. There was a 100 to 200 hour stretch where I was break even in a game that I was like absolutely crushing. I was playing way below probably where I should have been. And just, I was dominating and winning tons of money, and it was going great. There was like at least a 100 hour period where it was like, I didn't make any money. And that is a lot to deal with, as with our human brains and our psychology. But, I never looked at that graph and was like, oh, the 100 hours that I didn't make any money. It was just like, oh, this is a nice little graph going here. Feels pretty good.
Yeah, the long-term graph is a good one. I've done that stuff in the past and had extended break-even stretches that really suck. And again, how you perceive them, I think, is really important. Do you perceive them as something that destroys you or something that motivates you to get off your ass and maybe put in a little bit of extra time and effort? And that's what I did. And just make sure that when you're doing that you're, again, focused on the right stuff. So I made the mistake of, I think I'd gone through like a, 100K break-even stretch online. I was just like, something's got to be off. So I hired a database guy and came in, ran through my whole thing because I wanted an objective view outside of my own view of my results. And he ended up breaking down, like, I was getting dealt some ace king at like 40% as much as I should be, and catching top pair with it like 50% less than I should be. And over a decent sized sample, like, that actually adds up, and that's a good chunk of your win rate getting eaten away from you. And there's this part of me that just wanted to like go on life tilt about it. And maybe I did for an afternoon, but after that, I'm like, what the hell am I getting mad about? Like, just is what it is. Like,
Yep.
again, like you just have to reframe all these things and not get focused on the stuff that doesn't matter in the slightest.
Yeah.
And one, yeah,
What you just outlined,
yeah,
sorry, what you just outlined is a super common thing that I hear from people where it's like, oh, my all in EV or,
Yep.
my aces versus kings situation. And they'll focus in and be able to find the situation where they're getting unlucky or the thing, whatever the psychological trap that they're into is justified or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And if it makes you feel better for a moment because you need something to make you feel better for a moment, then use it for a moment. But it can't be a long-term crutch because you don't know what the next 100K hands is going to bring for you. So again, don't focus on stuff that just doesn't matter and doesn't impact you positively at all. To build on one thing you mentioned earlier, you mentioned your stop loss being about a 3 buy-in stop loss. And I've used a lot of different stop losses over time. I've used 2 buy-in stop losses. I've used 5, I've used 10. And one thing when you're building this kind of like tilt proofing part of your mental game, because that's really what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to like Fort Knox the tilt button in your brain. So what do I need to do to build around this thing to protect it so that nothing can trigger me and put me on tilt? That's really, really important. I think it's a lot easier to do that than it is to try to figure out how to get out of tilt faster once you're in it. If you can stay away from tilt in the first place, all the better. Focus on that. So you might do things like implement a really tight stop loss because you don't want to lose a lot of money and that helps you feel better and no problem. And you're also at the same time developing discipline, which gives you more confidence in the long run, all good things. But over time, as you get stronger and stronger, don't hesitate to look at these bricks you've built protecting your tilt button and start experimenting with taking them off. Because at some point, you're going to find that some of these things you've done have been too refining. Could be sessions that are too short. It could be stop losses that are too tight. So I've done mistakes like that where I've quit really, really good games because I hit this arbitrary stop loss.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's just like, that's a lot of money you leave on the table. Now, maybe it helps me, make breakfast the next day with a happier smile on my face because, discipline is good and everything. And maybe I avoided having a negative 12 buy-in session because, that can always happen in really wild games. But I miss out on massive home run potential. And the more you play poker semi-professionally and professionally, you cannot miss out on those kinds of days. So you have to get stronger at this. It means you have to revisit some of the bricks you've put up and just say, does this really need to be here anymore? Because as you get stronger and stronger, you're going to recognize like you've built some rules that just don't apply to you anymore. They apply to a younger, more naive version of you, not you right this moment.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I think that's for the more serious and more dedicated that you get. Like, yeah, your opportunity in a good game it can be very high. And yeah, even with a 3 buy-in stop loss, you're right. Like when I was in that game or playing heads up against that person, it was like, yeah, I'm not going to quit until I'm exhausted and can't make good decisions.
Yeah.
And that is part of it. I think I remember I used to tell you back in the day, it was like 15 or 20% of my profit would usually come from just like those amazing, for the year, 15 to 20% of my profit would come from just like those, I just got locked into someone who wanted to play me a ton of time. And there would be some enormous losses off the back of those as well. But, it was as a professional, a necessary opportunity. So yeah, I think maybe I would say at the beginning, be more protective of your psychology. And as you get more sophisticated, be more willing to maybe push the bounds and, in exchange for opportunity, not just because you got stacked a couple of times and are feeling salty. But when you see the opportunity there and you're focused on that, yeah, I think it's an important part of poker. Yeah.
100% agreed. And I think that's part of the benefit of journaling or having a really, really good internal dialogue is listen to what you're writing or what you're saying in your head. And if a lot of the discussion is just expletives and, this person's a donk and that kind of stuff, it's like, okay, well, maybe I'm not looking at this in the most objective way possible. Or, F luck, F luck, F luck. Be really, really honest and look at that stuff. And if you're in a good game and you can keep it running and your edges are good and you're making good decisions, that's all that matters. So, but if you're not, then put in the time and effort. And that's the beauty of especially this part of poker is all the work you put into this not only helps your poker win rate, but it helps your life. Because if I tilted easily as a dad, as a husband, as, I don't know, a functioning person in society, I don't know that I could classify myself as functioning as I'd like to. Because you see people that are tilting in real life at stores, online, I mean, anywhere. It's not a good thing. So spend the time here. It benefits you on and off the table very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's so huge is that, these are the skills that we bring with us in life. It's one of the most fun parts about poker, I think, is that, I was listening to a business owner talk about, how he had done something or made some sort of tax mistake or something that cost him $1 million. And he wasn't salty about it at all. He was just like, yeah, I mean, you're moving fast. Things are happening. What are you going to do? And I think so many people can get frustrated by the things that they missed or the things that they lost, that they have a difficult time letting things go. And, poker is such a beautiful game in that it allows us to experience loss, experience our own shortcomings and failures in, a very contained environment, but put ourselves in those situations regularly. And I think, being able to be comfortable taking risk is so important in this world in terms of investing, in terms of, going after opportunities like jobs and relationships and things, and just being comfortable with like the fact that things aren't going to always go your way is such a powerful thing to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Excellent. I feel pretty good with this chat. You have any other things to add?
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Cool. Me too. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for chatting today about Tilt. And if you are listening to this and you're like, I have some thoughts, I have some questions, I want to share this thing, and it's not a bad beat, feel free to join us over on the Red Chip Poker Discord. Just go to redchippoker.com/discord, get taken right there. Join today. It's totally free, and we'd love to chit chat with you over there. And if you need anything at all, do not hesitate to let us know. Otherwise, we'll see you back soon with a brand new episode. In the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.